Hi, everyone. It's Jessica Drummond here from the Integrative Women's Health Institute, and I'm thrilled to be here today with my friend and brilliant environmental toxins expert, Lara Adler. Hi, Lara.
Hi, thanks Jess for having me back in.
Thank you so much for coming. So Lara has been working with us for a couple of years now and contributed quite a bit of awesome content to our optimal fertility course for professionals because she really is an expert at training health and wellness professionals in having a conversation about environmental toxins and really how important that is in every health discipline and every wellness discipline. So can you talk a little bit more, Lara, about why this toxicity conversation is so important when, in graduate school for most of our disciplines, we really don't talk about this at all. We might talk about nutrition for a couple of hours, but I can't remember any formal training I've had in environmental toxins as a clinician.
Yeah, and I think that's actually really common. So I had looked at a couple of studies a couple of years ago that for medical professionals, for physicians in their sort of tenure of education, on average, they have only about 7 hours of training in environmental health. And that's if an environmental health module is part of their curriculum and it's not a required piece of curriculum. So physicians, pediatricians, anybody who's graduating medical school is woefully uninformed, unfortunately, about environmental health issues, despite the fact that many are starting to recognize that exposure to toxins or toxicants in our environment are in fact a primary driver of disease. Joseph Pizzorno, who's the founder of Bastyr University, has been making that statement for years, that toxicity is the primary driver of disease. And I think that as practitioners who are out, whether you're working in a more clinical practice or you're working in sort of a boots on the ground lifestyle changes, which a lot of people are moving to that model. I think it's so important to address this piece of the puzzle. It is a tremendous contributing factor to so many of the health conditions that people are presenting with, whether it's infertility, obviously per our course, or hormonal imbalance, or thyroid disorders, or metabolic diseases. There is an environmental component to all of those. And I think if we are wanting to support our clients and patients in a really powerful and holistic and comprehensive way, I think that it's critical for us to have a degree of fluency in environmental health, both in understanding what the connections are, but then also on the practical side of, like, how do we actually talk to people about things like their food containers and their personal care products and things like that. So, I really just fundamentally believe that all practitioners, regardless of your modality, need to have this to be able to support their clients. And I think also awareness about chemicals in consumer products is really reaching a level of consumer awareness that it hasn't been before. So people are freaked out about BPA and they're like, oh, what is that? What do I do? And they're reading about things like lead in drinking water and flame retardants and the links to all kinds of health issues. And they're kind of freaked out. And the fact that there's not enough professionals out there able to have that conversation and be that resource for those people, I think is a real disservice. So I think that in my experience, my clients, when they have stepped forward as being a resource in this space, people are like falling over themselves with questions because they're like, oh my God, I finally have somebody who can knows about this stuff, and what do I do and what do I buy? And I'm just like, I don't know what to do. So I think it's a really valuable addition to someone's practice to be able to talk about this stuff.
Absolutely. And I've been talking with more and more clinicians, health coaches, I think in a way are on the leading edge of this, actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's fantastic because they're really in the trenches of behavior change,
yes,
helping people make those choices about exactly what, personal care products they're going to use, which water filter they're going to pick. And,
yep.
So many of those things can be somewhat personal. and individualized. But I think clinicians, you know, I was talking to a neurologist the other day who's starting to really shift from normal clinical practice into this preventive behavior change kind of medicine, because we've got to get upstream
Yes.
problems. And physical therapists are seeing this as a key part of their practice. I think not at the day-to-day level yet, but I think our professional organizations are starting to realize it, because the certification board in Texas that certifies physical therapy training actually just gave approval for continuing education units for the course that we co-wrote.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And, you know, that covers about 20 states in the United States. And, you know, they looked at Lara's background in particular to see that this is something really valuable for those of us. And I think physical therapists and occupational therapists and some of, you know, nurses, allied health, we tend to have more time with our patients. So we can have than sort of the 7-minute conventional.
Yes. Yeah.
So we have time to answer those questions, and the more educated we are, the better support we can give. So, you know, right now, can you tell us some of the sort of hot topics, some of the really important environmental issues that we should be aware of as health coaches and clinicians?
Yes. And I'm going to thumbtack that, because before I even answer that question, I want to just kind of talk for a hot second about reframing the detox conversation, because I think, so you had said that, you know, you're not, in your clinical experience and your education, there wasn't really discussion of detoxing. And so I actually want to approach this conversation from a slightly different perspective. So detoxing is, you know, when we're thinking of our liver and our kidneys and our colon and you know, perspiration and exhalation as means of detoxification. And those, we have this built-in system, but the challenge is that that system is being overburdened. The analogy or the story that I like to tell, it's as if we were in a rowboat and we're just kind of rowing along, and we have a hole gets punched in the bottom of our boat, and our boat starts filling up with water. And we take a bucket and start bailing it out. And that's the detox process. That's us emptying the boat. But if we never stop to plug that hole, that boat is going to fill with water at a rate that's faster than we can bail it out. Mm-hmm. And then we, at a certain point, will become exhausted. And that's where our body starts to break down, and the body burden of chemicals really tips the scale, and we push towards disease expression. So my position on this is that we really have to plug that hole first, that is really the first step, because once we stop the chemicals, or at least slow the flow of chemicals that are coming into the body, which we can do in a pretty measurable way, then it means that the detox process becomes that much more efficient and effective, so that all of the nutritional support and the healthy eating and the healthy lifestyle changes that health coaches or other sort of boots on the ground practitioners are working on, like that work becomes more powerful in the absence of having to fight against the chemicals in the body. So
right, absolutely, yeah.
I just like to kind of shift people's perspective of detox, so that they're not just thinking like cleanse protocols or forced detoxification protocols. This is more of a preemptive, preventative detox of our personal environment. Yeah. So back to your question about what are some of the worst ones, I think it's really hard, to a certain extent, it's hard to answer that question, because some of that depends on sort of bio-individuality and how people's organs of detoxification are functioning, what their liver function is like, what their genetics is like. There's all kinds of things that can determine whether or not somebody is going to be more affected or less affected by the same exposures. But barring that, I think the things that are most concerning are endocrine disrupting chemicals, because they're everywhere, and because our bodies, our endocrine system is really designed to respond to sort of teeny tiny amounts of hormone in the body. That's just how our natural hormone levels are. And the types of exposures that we're getting in our environment from our personal care products and plastics, and I'll talk about those in a second, are such a significant source. And because the disruption of the endocrine system leads to so many different health conditions, that if we just addressed endocrine disruptors, I think we would be in like a really great position. Even if we didn't address all the chemicals, all the heavy metals and things like that. I mean, even lead, which we know is a huge issue, especially in preconception and during pregnancy, but also for children and then as adults as well. Lead is also an endocrine disrupting chemical. It's a metalloestrogen. So in terms of what this means at a practical level of addressing endocrine disrupting chemicals, I really think that the sort of hot areas where practitioners can really start having the conversation is with plastics and with canned foods and with personal care products. And this is why I love the health coaches and the people that have more than a 7-minute office visit, right? Because they have the opportunity in the conversations that they're having to extend their conversation just about diet or stress management or sleep. It's also about these things. So, plastics, whether it's BPA or any of the replacement chemicals that they're now finding are just as bad, if not worse. This is what I think BPA is BS. BPA free is BS. Which should be like an infographic, I think. Right. BPA free is BS. And for the most part, they're calling, when they're swapping out BPS or BPF or some of the other bisphenol chemicals that are just as bad or not worse, they call these regrettable substitutions. So I really want to encourage people to, like you said, stay on the ahead of the curve and not wait for us to go, oh, damn. Oh, well, so all that stuff that I was doing that I thought was great now isn't great, because that's what we're finding. So really looking at plastics, whether it's a polycarbonate plastic, which is sort of the famed where BPA is primarily found, or saran wrap or disposable water bottles or plastic cooking utensils or your plastic pasta strainer. This is a lot of the stuff that we had talked about in the fertility course. Mm-hmm. That these are really easy places for us to be able to encourage people to shift their purchasing habits and their behaviors in their home. And the same thing goes for fragranced products, like in personal care products that have fragrance as an ingredient or perfume. That's an indication that phthalates are present. Phthalates are another endocrine disruptor. And if we think about all the things that we have as fragrances in our home, or maybe not you and I, but sort of we as a collective people, you've got Febreze air fresheners and scented candles and those, fragrance diffusers and laundry detergent and dish soap and shampoo, lotion, perfume. All of these things are sources of exposure to these endocrine disrupting chemicals. Now, the good news here, because there isn't always good news, and I want to make sure we always highlight it, is that our bodies can metabolize many of these chemicals really quickly, like within a few hours to a few days. And so what that means is when we plug up that hole in the boat, when we eliminate these products from our homes and we stop our exposure, the levels of circulating phthalates in the body can drop within, I think there was a study out of Sweden last year that was looking at female teen girls' use of personal care products, and they switched to personal care products that didn't contain these ingredients, and their levels of phthalates and parabens dropped 30 or 40%, like within a short period of time. And so that's in real life us stopping the chemicals from coming into the body. So those are really the hot areas that I think we should be spending the most of our attention, is really looking at endocrine disrupting chemicals in all the places that they live.
Yeah, that's a really great point, because I think it affects some of the most common issues that we see, especially in women's health. It certainly affects hormonal balance, it affects thyroid and other autoimmune conditions.
Yes.
Headaches and premenstrual symptoms, menstrual cycles that are messed up, too heavy or too light or irregular. And certainly, we're seeing early puberty, we're seeing infertility. So I think in women's health, that's absolutely
it's a non-negotiable. I really put it into the non-negotiable category because of how many sort of fingers it has into all these health conditions. At the end of last year, there was a study that was making financial projections about what the implications are health-wise and economic-wise to exposure to endocrine-disrupting chemicals. And the research study just looked at a handful of these endocrine-disrupting chemicals and projected out based on some of the top health issues that they have play in. And they found that healthcare costs and lost wages in the United States annually as a result of exposure to these chemicals is $340 billion a year. Is what it costs the United States in healthcare costs and lost wages. And obviously it's a projection, so it's not a perfect number, but it gives us an indication of how significant this issue is. And that's just a fraction of what we're exposed to. And so if we can alleviate some of the pressure on our individual health, I think that from a broad scale, that will certainly have positive implications for our healthcare costs in this country, which are insane.
Out of control, actually.
Out of control.
To put that in perspective, I mean, that's like 60% of the military budget. That's a massive.
Yeah, it's a huge amount. And in the European Union, that figure, because the study looked at a comparative of same parameters in both the US and the EU, it was about half of that in the European Union. It was half of that cost because the European Union regulates these chemicals far more aggressively than we do in the United States. And they also have national health care, which is why they regulate, because they bear the burden of that cost. So I really think that we don't have that luxury of that. So as consumers, we bear the burden of that cost, which gives us all the more reason to need to take our health into our own hands and make smarter choices and decisions. And if somebody is seeking out a practitioner because they have a health problem, it's, I think, that practitioner's responsibility to encourage and inspire and empower their clients and patients to be advocates for themselves. And I think part of that, it seems disconnected from a thyroid disorder to say, hey, let's talk about your shampoo, but these things are very closely connected. And I think we need to have those conversations.
Absolutely. And the younger, the better, because, I have a 13-year-old and the amount of stuff she wants to put on her face and spray.
Yes.
And,
oh, it's really hard.
Yeah. So that's a really important thing. And
yeah.
I want to talk to you just a bit about, I love the term you use when you were teaching in our optimal fertility program about practical avoidance. I think, the more you understand about this topic, the more absolutely frustrating it is. Just the other day, I was looking at a study about, getting people on a treadmill who are fragile diabetics. The exposure to the MFs actually worsens their blood sugar balance. And I've got my salt lamp over here. We're exposed to so much stuff. It can be kind of overwhelming. Yeah. And so over time, though, I think this concept of not freaking out our clients and patients, approaching this from a practical avoidance standpoint, talk a little bit more about how that's helped you work with clients and have them be committed to making the changes without panicking or freaking out.
Right. I think that what I try to communicate is a couple of things. One is that our goal is not to be a totally toxic free, because that is literally impossible. It is a totally Sisyphean endeavor to try to detox, to be pure. That, even polar bears in the Arctic have flame retardants in their bodies, because some of these things are really just systemic in our environment. Mm-hmm. And so I make sure that people understand that our goal is not purity. Our goal is to do the best that we can within our means. It's not, I think that anybody who's going to seek out a practitioner to help them isn't somebody who wants to bury their head in the sand and go no, I don't want to know. Sometimes there's those people out there. So one, I think it's really understanding that we're doing the best we can. And then the other thing, and this is really sort of my whole approach, is that we change the things that we can control so that we worry less about the ones that we can't. And I think when people look at it from that perspective, it gives them a little bit of, okay, I can't do everything. I'm not going to never go swimming in a swimming pool because there's chlorine. I'm not never going to drive in my car. I'm not going to check out of modern society and go yurt in the woods. We don't need to do that. I think that we can be normal people and live normal lives, whatever that means for us, without feeling like we're this social outcast because we don't do these certain things, or we don't, do those certain things. I think we have to make this conversation accessible, approachable, for people. And part of that comes from having the conversation from that platform, of we're just going to do what we can in our lives that's practical. And some things aren't practical, and maybe we just cut ourselves a little bit of slack. And we compensate in other ways by making sure that we're getting the nutrition that we need to support our detox process, because we're not able to rip out the cabinets in our home that might be off-gassing formaldehyde, right? Like it would be a crazy request for a health coach to make that request of somebody. And so, being aware of what those things are is important, but we want to guide people towards accessible solutions. And I think that part is key. I think the other part that's really key about having this conversation is making sure that we are not doing it from an all or nothing perspective. Anything helps. Eating a mostly organic diet, not even an exclusively organic diet, can drop circulating pesticide levels by 80 to 90% in 3 to 5 days. So that is a very dramatic and measurable impact that a small behavior change can result in. And so we want to encourage those types of actions, because there can be a significant result or impact that's positive. So one, making sure that we're encouraging and inspiring people to make powerful changes that are going to support their health journey, and that we're not doing it in a finger waggy, you have to do this or you're going to die, sensational, fear-mongering way, because people don't respond well to that regardless of what the topic is. And I think especially when we're talking about chemical toxins, there tends to be a lot of sensational conversation. And I just think that does a disservice to those of us that are really looking at the research and wanting people to make small but important changes in their daily lives that can really support their health. So that's sort of the roundabout way that I really that I'll explain that. I think there's far more to it than that. In fact, some of that we get into in the fertility course, of really making sure that you're talking through the lens of what your audience is. If you work with women that have Hashimoto's, then you talk about chemicals that interfere with Hashimoto's. If you work with people that have metabolic disease, you talk about the chemicals that interfere with metabolic disease, metabolism, and that can contribute to metabolic disease.
Yeah, I think, it's just it's a health coaching way to address it. You meet people where they are. And I think that starts though with the practitioner really having a grasp of this whole topic, because the more we understand it, the more we've committed to making some of these changes in our lives, the more we realize, it's an impossible thing to do completely, but it's an important thing to do to whatever level is practical. We've had that experience and we really understood the topic. I think, just kind of, reading a few articles about it is honestly just not enough, because it's very far reaching.
And nor are like the infographics. So there's like some beautifully produced infographics that I've seen, and people are like, great, I know this stuff. And it's far more than that. It's far more than that can be delivered in an infographic, or even, a PDF or a long blog post. There's a lot of subtlety and nuance to understanding how all these pieces fit together, where you have some intersection between public policy and why we have this chemical there because this public policy is in place. There's a lot of subtlety and nuance that gets lost in those sort of snippet soundbite pieces of information that are so readily available online. And, what I've found is that the health practitioners that are really committed to their education and serving their clients, like they know, like that's not enough for them anyway. Like no, they're not going to be happy with an infographic. They're super nerds, right? They want to know more. And those are my favorite people, because that's me and that's you. So, I think that, that information delivered in that way is not enough for most people, which is why I teach these classes, because I want people to have a broader depth of information.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that. I really appreciate your specialization in this topic. I think it's going to potentially get increasingly worse with environmental regulations being loosened. And honestly, you know, we just are seeing such a dramatic rise in autoimmune disease and metabolic syndrome and some of these really chronic issues. And the data is telling us that nutrition and movement is not enough. So as you know, as clinicians who really want to support people to get to the root causes, we need to be better trained. So can you tell us how, you know, as clinicians and coaches, what kinds of courses you have available coming up?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have 3 primary courses that I teach in my sort of repertoire, but the course that I have that's coming up, which I'm pretty excited about, is called Blueprint for a Healthy Life, Foundational Pillars for Non-Toxic Living. It's kind of a long name. Short, it's called Blueprint. And Blueprint is a 3-month exploration of what are some of the key chemicals that we're exposed to, looking through the lens of how they enter our body in the first place. So looking at chemicals that we ingest, ones that we absorb through our skin, and ones that we inhale. And there's different issues, you know, ones that we ingest, for example, have the benefit of going through our GI system and right through the liver and first pass metabolism, and chemicals that enter through the skin and through the lungs bypass that first pass. And so there's sort of different reasons why those are really, really important to look at. And so we spend 3 months together really looking at what are some of these big issues, and we're looking at things like contamination in seafood, right? Methylmercury issues and PCBs and pesticides. People are so confused about seafood. They still are, despite all of these recommendations one way or the other. Eat seafood, don't eat seafood, eat this seafood, don't eat that seafood. Is it farmed? Is it wild? And people get really confused, and especially in the fertility and preconception space. Sometimes they just abstain completely, which is not what we want. So really helping people understand those issues. We look at things like contaminants in drinking water, which after the Flint, Michigan lead fiasco has really been on people's sort of top of mind for people. And anybody that we're working with, you know, water is obviously fundamental. I drink, you know, 2-3 quarts of it a day. I want to make sure that like it's not I'm not ingesting chemicals that could suppress my thyroid, for example, which millions of people in the United States have that. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we wonder why we have such rampant thyroid disease. So we're really looking at these sort of 3 pillars of mode of entry into the body. And what I love about this course is, in addition to all of that education, we're also spending time on application. So I'm a strong believer that information is great, but it's only as great as your ability to use it. And this is where some of that business support and coaching and mentoring comes in, because the way that one person talks about toxins for their practice dealing with Hashimoto's might be different than the person who is working in preconception or is a doula or a midwife, and how are they going to talk about toxins? And so I want to make sure that people have a space to be able to workshop that with me. And so in Blueprint, it's a combination of that sort of education and application. I love this course. I've had a couple hundred people come through this course already with really great feedback. You know, one of the things that I both strive for and that comes naturally is that I don't ever want my classes to be dry or boring, because I'm not dry or boring. And this subject, this topic, can be dry, it can be scary, it can be overwhelming, and I want to make sure that people aren't bored to tears reading about or learning about endocrine disrupting chemicals or lead in their drinking water. I want them to feel that, you know, that there is a lightness or a levity to the education that makes it more digestible. And that's actually something that I'm really proud of, because I've seen other practitioners in the online space teaching about toxins, and I've just been bored to tears. And I think that this conversation is too important for us to be like, oh, whatever about. It's too important.
Well, and I like that, how you're applying it, you know, actually putting it into the real world. I think that's one of the benefits of learning from someone like you who's really immersed herself in it. I love that story you've told me years ago about going to kind of the environmental toxins conference with all of these PhD researchers. Yes. And, they really understand a lot of the biochemistry of BPA. And yet one of them was sitting next to you drinking soda out of a can.
And they had no idea. And and I pointed out that there's BPA in the lining of that can. And that person literally was like, wait, what? And she had no idea. And that was fascinating to me. And it was really insightful to see that, yes, people can have this incredibly high degree of clinical and evidentiary-based education and training, but if they don't understand how it shows up in their real world, in their daily lives, then what's the point?
And that's what people are hungry for. That's what people need us for. I'm always saying they need the information, but more than that, they need the transformation. They need
absolutely.
They need the behavior change. So, well, thank you so much, Lara. I'm really looking forward to this course coming up that you have, the Blueprint course. And, I so love the work that you did on our fertility course. It's an excellent course, extremely popular. And so, we'll give people more information about the program and let them know when it's beginning. I think you teach this one live, right?
This one I teach live, and it runs, this year it's running from May, so it starts in early May 2nd, and it runs through the end of July. And this class runs once a year, so this is it for 2017. And I'm really excited. One of the things that I make sure that I do every year when I teach this class is update all of the content. This is a dynamic and a constantly evolving conversation about environmental health. And I always want to make sure everybody has access to the most current information. And one of the ways that I like being able to do that is when somebody signs up for this class, they actually have lifetime access, so they can take it again as many times as they want and have access to the updated content. So the people who took it in 2012 are getting all the updates that are now present in 2017. And I love being able to do that. So we've got a really great community in this course. And
yeah, that's fantastic. Well, thank you so much. We look forward to it. I'm excited about that. And thank you for the work that you do. I think
thanks.
It's really important. It's really important.
I love it. Thanks.
All right. Thanks so much, Lara. Great to hang out with you today. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. You too.
All right. Bye-bye.